Hi, welcome to this AQA A-Level Business revision video, focusing on 3.3.3, making marketing decisions, looking at segmentation, targeting and positioning. In today's video, we're going to break down market segmentation, have a little look about how we target our customers, and then positioning via market mapping. Quick reminder that my teaching here is separate from all of my teaching and consultation roles at any and all academies throughout the country. My name is Mr. Giles. Let's get down to business. So hopefully you're watching these videos in order on the playlist, and you would have covered the videos looking at, say, market research and then looking at price elasticity and income elasticity, because there is a bit of debate amongst teachers about in which order to teach this, because it could be argued that you want to do segmentation and targeting and positioning first before then carrying out research, because if you could say, for example, stratified sampling, you're going to break your population down into certain people. Well, that is segmentation. So if you are watching this in the correct order and you've gone back and you've looked at those other videos, just bear in mind that some of this stuff might happen before the research and then before looking at, say, pricing and income elasticity. However, for the sake of looking at it from the spec perspective, we'll just carry on as we are. So let's break this down. First of all, what is segmentation? Well, I've put on the board here, dividing the total population market by various characteristics. So the total population market by various characteristics. And I've listed the four characteristics, or the four main characteristics that you need to know on the board here. Now, before we get into that, let's look at the purpose of segmentation. And there's a phrase that I'm going to use probably multiple times in this video. I'll try not to, but it's that if you try and sell to everybody, you are in fact selling to nobody. And so by segmenting the market, i.e. by breaking it up by various characteristics, what you do is you create a particular avatar, you create the perfect customer in your brain as an entrepreneur, and then you try and sell to them. Now, at its base level, it's quite simple. Maybe you make hair gel specifically for men, so you're going to sell it to men. So you've already segmented the market right there. Hopefully you get the general idea. So what are the four characteristics that we need to know for segmentation? Well, here they are on the board. First of all, we have demographic. Now, demographic is the most broad one. This has actually been a 25 marker before as well. So this is a keyword. And I've just put a few bits on there. So I've got age, gender, and I've tried to delicately summarize it as culture. Okay, so you can split up a population by age very simply: young people, old people, middle-aged people. You could do it in age brackets, for example. And it makes it a bit straightforward, doesn't it? Okay, so it makes sense, because let's say, for example, you're selling Coca-Cola. Straight away, you're going to segment the market because you probably don't want to sell it to kids younger than, say, 10. They're not your customers, are they? And are older people, say, like, in their 70s drinking Coke? Probably not. So that's why you want to segment your market via age. Gender's another one. Are you making products that are kind of male-based or female-based? And then culture. Culture is a tricky one, but we have to acknowledge that there are various cultures that purchase and use various products and services that others do not. Now, for the sake of sensitivity, I won't go into that now, but I'm almost certain you can use your brain and come up with some. So that's the first way of segment the market, is via demographics, and it's usually where most businesses start. Up next, we look at geographic. Now, for your, say, small entrepreneur, for your small business, i.e. your local sweet shop, that geographic segmentation naturally happens because they're just in the area that they're in. So they have to only consider the customers that are in that area. However, if you're, say, a Tesco, you might geographically segment via the north and south of England. And when I teach this, I often look at the north and south of England when it comes to, say, something like gravy. Now, if you're in the north of England and you're watching this, then you won't find anything strange about that. If you're in the south of England and you're watching this, you'll be thinking, what's the on about gravy? Well, in the north, they like putting gravy on their chips. In the south, we use salt, pepper, whatever, okay? So just that one simple north and south divide might make a slight decision more difficult for Tesco in terms of, well, in the shops in the north of England, do they stock more gravy than in the south? That's a marketing decision, okay? We've also got here income. Now, income is pretty obvious, but you could do it in two different ways. You could just do it by just pure wages or pure salaries. So you're going to segment your market out in terms of who earns 30 grand, 40 grand, so on and so forth. Or you might actually do it by what we call socio-economic status. Now, this is a bit of an old-fashioned kind of idea, and it's certainly not on specification, but it's interesting to know. We used to have a class-based system, so working class, middle class, upper middle class, so on and so forth. Now, they're not actually separated by wage. Okay, so I know many landscapers, builders, carpenters, electricians who are technically working class that earn significant amounts of money. However, the way they spend their money differs differently to, say, my friends who are investment bankers. Okay, so even though they might earn similar money, the way they spend their money and even the places where they choose to live, drastically different. So you might want to consider that. That might be something we want to consider when we're doing our marketing. And then the last one here we've got is behavior. Now, behavior is very tricky to kind of pin down. So I've given you two examples here. First of all, I've given you spending habits. So it may well be that you are targeting people who have particular spending habits. And I'll give you an example that might give you a bit of pause for thought. Do you know anybody in your life who goes to betting shops? Maybe you do, and maybe you don't. I'm going to make a wager, and you can put it in the comments if you like, that there will be half of you watching this video who probably don't even know what a betting shop is and or have never interacted with one. And there'll be half of you who have been to one with somebody that you know. Okay, that is a spending habit. There are people who do go and people who don't. It's not one of those things where people kind of like, oh, I might take a wander today. They either go or they don't go. And then I've put here your daily behavior. All right. Now, this is a bit more of a tricky one to explain, but it comes up in case studies a lot in terms of who the customers of the business are. So the way I like to think about it is, who is it you're trying to advertise, market, and sell to based off of the behaviors that they show during the day? So are you advertising to the early risers, to the people who are up on the trains 6 o'clock, people like me? Okay, because the way you advertise to them is very different to the way that you advertise to the people who are out late surfing the trains at, say, 11 o'clock at night. Now, unfortunately, on the trains, they can't change their adverts as they go, but your social media companies can. So in the mornings when I'm on the train and I'm scrolling the old socials, I'm getting a lot of adverts for, say, coffee and energy drinks because it's early. Okay, when it's late at night, I'm getting a lot of adverts for, say, dinner and drinks. So they're daily behaviors. How do you behave on the daily? Now, I don't start very late, folks, because I'm on the train every morning. So I mostly get the coffee adverts. You get the idea. So those are the 4 ways that you might segment the market. And you're going to segment in multiple ways until you find the perfect customer. And once you've done that, you'll probably then do research based off of that information. Now, you might still do research just to double check that the people you've segmented out of your marketing decisions, you've done that correctly. And what I mean by that is, if you're selling products that are aimed deliberately, say, at men, take my hair gel example, you might ask some females and go, hey, what do you reckon? Do you like this hair gel? And they go, no, it's rubbish, it's for men. You go, good, it's not for you. Okay, that's what you want to hear. You want to maybe just confirm that bias. So we segment the market in these 4 potential ways. Let's have a look now at targeting. So a business has conducted its segmentation. It's segmented by age and gender and culture, perhaps. So it knows it's going to aim, say, at men of a particular age with a particular cultural background. And then it's looked at various other things. So it's their income. So we're going to aim it at people earning, say, less than 30 grand a year. It may be looked at some behavioral aspects. So how they spend their money. These are people who enjoy Lego. Okay, so on and so on and so forth. And they're going to geographically aim it at people in the north of the country. So it's segmented. And then what it's going to do is going to target those particular people. Now, targeting is essentially creating that avatar. I'm going to use that word again. I used it in a previous section, but an avatar is essentially a fancy word of saying like the perfect customer. So they would draw that perfect customer in terms of, they would say, look, this is what our perfect customer looks like. And that's who we're going to advertise to. Because again, if you advertise to everybody, you don't advertise to anybody. So if we say, right, this particular person with these characteristics is our customer, that's who they're targeting. Now, we can go a step further than that, and then we could target via market as well, because we might have our perfect customer, but they exist in various markets. So they exist in mass markets, i.e. the general population, and then they exist in niche markets. So these are a subsector of the mass market. Now, my students who I've taught over many years always like to rib me about this example, and it might come across as a bit funny, but you will get it, I promise you, okay? If you're watching this right now, you are a student of some description, or have been a student, or maybe you're a teacher, and you probably at some point have owned a tie, okay? Now, ties are both mass market and niche market, because Any of us could walk into, say, Marks and Spencer's and buy a silk tie for £20 that would be somewhat stylish and appropriate for all people. Okay. Now, if we think about ties, they're mostly aimed at, say, men. If we're perfectly honest, they do ladies' ties, but let's go with men. So they're men. Who's wearing ties? Well, is that an age thing? Well, yeah, you've got sixth formers and then you've got kind of like, middle management people, but the age is quite broad, so on and so forth, right? So you would create the avatar of the person who's wearing the tie, and it would probably be less about demographics and more about, say, behavior, i.e., where they work or where they study. Okay. But once you've got to that, you could then drill down one step further and say, okay, so do we want to sell ties to that avatar in general, or do we want to sell to the hardcore lover of ties? Because I'm almost certain if you're sat there right now and you do own a tie and you're not mad into fashion like I am, your tie was £20 from Marks and Spencer's. My tie was 5 times that price from a little town in Italy somewhere. Mass market, niche market. Is a tie a tie? Yes. If we sat next to each other on the train, would anyone know? Probably not. Okay. But we fit the same avatar. Okay. You wear ties, I wear ties. It's just that you might have bought yours from the mass market. I bought mine for the niche market. Targeting. Let's move on to positioning now, and we'll look at market mapping. Okay. So on the board here, I've put a market map, and this is how we choose how to position our business. Okay. Now, that concept of positioning is where in the market are we actually going to try and operate? So we've segmented the market out so we know who we want to sell to. We've picked a niche, or a mass market. And so we know roughly what size market we're aiming at. Then we take our market and we map it out based off of that. And then we go, right, where are we going to put ourselves in this market? Because if we put ourselves right on top of another competitor, we're probably going to struggle. Now, I've changed it up slightly here. I'm sticking with fashion, but I've gone with more mainstream fashion. So this is a mass market fashion market map here. And my two axes are price and quality. Now, the thing to note is when it comes to market mapping, you don't have to use price and quality if that's not appropriate to your business. You could use, say, features and customer service, for example. It depends on what it is you're trying to map or how you're trying to differentiate yourself. So we've got our two axes, and I've just marked out what I think looks like the mainstream kind of fashion here, right? So in the low price, low quality section, unfortunately down the bottom here, I've put TU and George. I'd have put Tesco's, but for life of me, I can't remember what they're called now. So, people are not buying their best stuff from supermarkets, and they're relatively quite cheap as well. I buy most of my daughter's clothes from there because they're really cheap and she destroys them. So I'm okay with that. Up here, I've put Primark. They're slightly better quality, I think. They're certainly better than they used to be. And I don't actually think they're that cheap anymore. Last time I went in there to buy a suitcase, it was outrageously expensive. Learn my lesson. Up next, we've got into more of the higher quality, higher prices. So I've gone H&M, then I've gone Zara, and then I put Ralph Lauren. Now, you might go, well, Ralph Lauren's not really that mainstream. You might be right. I was just trying to think of something high quality. So if we look here, there's a clear kind of line here. And if you've watched my video about data and market research, that's a strong correlation, folks. Positive. You'll note that there are no brands sitting in the high quality, low price section because that doesn't make sense. That's not a good place to be because being high quality costs money. Being low price means you don't make any money. Tough. And there's certainly nobody in the high price, low quality bracket because that is a recipe for disaster. So if I wanted to position my business and I've already segmented, so I'm aiming my men's fashion to middle income earners in the mass market. There you go. That's my targeting and my segmentation done. I now need to decide where I'm going to put myself because you might be going, well, hang on. So you went middle income. Well, middle income people still buy Ralph Lauren. Okay. If I was going low income, then you're quite right. I'd probably just be sticking myself down the bottom there. But I went middle income, so I've got a bit of variety here. So where's the gap? Where's the space? Well, there's a gap here, and there's a bit of a gap up here. There's certainly gaps here and here, but again, they're kind of dead zones. We don't want to be there. I'm going to whack myself here. I'm going to try and be slightly cheaper than Primark, slightly more expensive than TUI and George. Not TUI, sorry, TUI. And I'm going to try and keep my prices quite low and my quality sort of medium low, I suppose. And I'm going to position myself there. So when I do my marketing, I might actually use Primark and TUI as my examples. Okay, I might actually do like a price comparison and say, well, hey, look, Primark jeans are £10, my jeans are £8. And then the quality sort of speaks for itself at that point. So that's how I'm going to position myself. And I'm going to do those adverts and I'm going to send them to men who are middle income, who are of a particular age. And that's how I position myself. That positioning is very important, especially in the exams. And here's the secret sauce, folks, because in paper 3 specifically, if they tell you who their customer avatar is and what their core competencies or their source of competitive advantage is, and then they tell you who they're aiming it at, and those two things don't marry up. So their source of competitive advantage is they're really high quality, but they're trying to do really cheap products. There's a really good paper 2 case that it does that. I think it's called Drake's Hotel. It's this really fancy, no, it's a budget hotel chain, sorry. And they're trying to open a fancy hotel. That don't make sense. Okay, that's not true to your segmentation, your targeting, and your positioning all wrong. So it's probably not going to go very well. That's the secret sauce, folks. If you've got any comments, please, or any questions, put them down below and I'll try and get back to every single one as quick as I can. I'll catch you in the next video.